En lep dober večer, ponovno v imenu Kulturne rezidence Podlog pod Bohorjem. V današnjem četrtem večeru ponovno en lep dober dan iz naše strani. Moje ime je Matic Gajšek in sem ustanovitelj oziroma pobudnik projekta Kulturne rezidence Podlog pod Bohorjem, v sklopu katere pripravljamo cikel strokovnih predavanj na temo z imenom Od kulturne dediščine do trajnostnega razvoja, s katerim želimo aktivno prispevati k prenosu znanj in kompetenc mednarodnih dobrih praks tudi v širše okolje Kozjanskega. Danes imamo še posebno čast, da je z nami še ena izmed res izvrstnih strokovnjakinj kulturne politike in študij različnih kulturnih politik preko Evrope, dr. Olga Kolokytha. Dr. Kolokytha je prav tako članica našega mednarodnega posvetovalnega odbora, s katerim in je prav tako zaslužna za res zanimiv in zelo velik preboj našega zavoda tudi na evropsko raven. Zaradi dr. Kolokythe smo pravzaprav postali del posvetovalnega odbora Evropske komisije na temo razvoja novih občinstev pod projektom Voices of Culture. Tako, dr. Kolokytha je sicer predavateljica in raziskovalka na Dunajski univerzi in mednarodno, tako kot svetovalka, raziskovalka sodeluje s projekti širom Evrope. Tako, brez dolgorečenja, še kratek uvod v angleščini, potem pa predamo besedo naši današnji predavateljici. A very good evening, Olga, also to you. I just made a very short introduction about your work and your contribution to Hiša Podlog. And without further ado, I would really love to give you the podium and give you the floor to start your presentation.
Thank you very much, dear Matic. It's very nice to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this series of lectures. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very honored for the invitation. Let me share my screen.
Okay, I think I need to just switch quickly.
Yeah.
Voila, there you are. Perfect.
Okay, let me share my screen in a second. Okay, can you see my screen? Super. Let me put the full screen on. Okay. So the topic of my talk this evening is going to be local cultural policy, cultural heritage as enabler of local development. The topic is part of my research interests. My area is cultural policy and sociology of culture, cultural diplomacy, and cultural management as well. And this is one of my areas of research, my areas of interest as well. It is the case that I'm going to be talking about is a case study that is also that also comes from close to my hometown, from an area close to my hometown. I come from Greece, and this is where I have conducted the empirical research. With reference to the talk, the running of the talk, I'm going to first give a few information on the theoretical background, some theoretical information on local cultural policy, and then I'm going to be talking about, excuse me, about the case study in particular. So to situate the talk and put a framework on the talk, what I'm going to be trying to show is how local cultural initiatives in rural areas can serve as instruments to reclaim place, contribute to the development of the local area, and functions as enablers of the population. There is an interest in my work and also in this talk about place, the meanings of place, how do we construct place, and so on. development, how culture can serve in local development. And for that, I'm going to present a case study of Yortes Rocas. It's called, the translation in English would be Rocas Festivities, which is an initiative that is developed in the inland of the western parts of Crete, the islands in Greece, in the Mediterranean. And it's an initiative that is aimed at encouraging citizen involvement and repopulation of the area. The focus is on the local and the rural level rather than the urban. So it's a different, what we're talking about, a different situation here. And the talk is also showcasing a model of grassroots cultural policy in which culture and creativity can thrive despite a lack of systematic state cultural policy support. Although there is some, there's no systematic cultural policy support in a certain framework. I'm going to be talking about this as well. So also this case study, this example aims to highlight a decommodified use of culture in cultural policy that is aimed not in creating, it's not targeting financial profits, but rather to create social connections and social fabric, and not financial. It's not stemming out of the financial interest, and it's not targeting economic aspects in that sense. It will showcase how cultural policy can flourish also in areas that are underserved from cultural policy, and also show how is it possible for the local community to take simultaneously the role of policymaker, of producer, and audience. And in that sense, it is an interesting example. Also showcase how cultural policy can emerge by non-experts. Cultural policy is not only in the hands of the experts. And it is part of an empirical research. The empirical data that the research is based on the research was conducted in late 2018 and early 2019 to gather the empirical data, and their data collection method. It is a qualitative research. It's a qualitative study, and the method is in-depth semi-structured interviews that were conducted with members of the organizing team, with members of the Rocas festivities, but also they comprise of informal interviews with audience members to sort of set the stage, and also prepare me in conducting the core research, preparing the semi-structured interviews. A few things about place. Place has not lost its interest, although we are in the, we're talking about globalization. Travel has become extremely easy. People can move around in different places around the globe. Well, that was before COVID, but here we are. But place as a geographical place has not lost its interest. Dert argues that excuse me, the sense of place can be different for different people in different times, and also that for a place to be distinct and a place to be visited, this place has to be created. This is also the reason why event organizers emphasize on venues, they emphasize on experiences in an attempt to connect people to places. This happens in tourism, but also in culture. Think, for example, the case of festivals, and how are they connected to different places, different cities, different areas. cultural policy makers have increasingly turned to economic priorities when it comes to designing cultural policies. And this is partly a result of the, largely a result of the neoliberal entrepreneurial discourse that became dominant, increasingly dominant since the 1980s. And as a result, they have been overlooking the social value of the arts and culture. This is a result also of flagship cultural policies that were concentrated on bolstering the positive images of cities. And they have been combined with a strong focus on urban regeneration. Think of, large-scale projects, large-scale events, mega events, international festivals. For example, also a large-scale initiative such as the European Cities of Culture. This is an example of such thing, with measurable impacts, and the economic priorities, economic impact is something that can be measured. And they have thus used culture for regeneration and instrumentalized the use of cultural policy for regeneration. Of course, this does not mean that peripheral areas and rural areas do not have cultural assets of their own, or that they're culturally stagnant. Things happen, always have happened in rural places, in peripheries, although the focus has been on the urban centers. One can also note a shift, a gradual shift of cultural policies beyond providing tools for heritage, for preservation, and creating a sense of identity, to become parts of strategies for spatial and socioeconomic development, as well as enhance the profile of certain areas. Cultural policy has been used more and more to enhance profiles of areas as a means for socioeconomic development, also spatial development, and also in creating, as a means of creating a sense of identity. This is also one of the reasons that the periphery and the rural areas, as a result of the shift, have started getting more attention. The importance of local rural developments can be seen also at the EU level, with the reform, for example, of the structural funds in 1988, that were reformed to target particularly disadvantaged areas, and is also visible with the introduction of socioeconomic development programs. I'm going to be talking about some of these soon. Local rural development is characterized by a bottom-up participatory approach, which has three main elements. So it has, first of all, a territorial rather than a sectorial orientation. It is aimed at on the territory. There's an emphasis on a smaller scale than that of the country. We're talking about local, we're talking about rural, we're talking about periphery, which means we're away from the urban centers and away from the metropolises. And there's also a focus on local resources, which are used to maximize benefits within the certain territory that's the focus of our interest. It's also, as a result, one can assume that this is also based on the needs and the perspectives of local people, serving the need of the local population. And it's also using local participation processes which have a community, cultural, or environmental character. In this particular example that I'm going to be talking about, there is an emphasis on the extra local, and there's an importance on the extra local whose mobilization is paramount to achieve a dynamic dialectic between internal and external actors, so actors from within and outside the area. And as such, it is an example of neo-endogenous development. Before talking about neo-endogenous development, though, it's important to talk about endogenous development, which is where it comes from. The LEADER program is an example of a local rural development strategy and is an example of this endogenous and neo-endogenous development. The LEADER was introduced by the European Union as a tool to promote rural development in areas that have a population of less than 100,000 people. And that was done mainly through small-scale actions. The proposed actions were bottom-up. They were based on local resources. They involved the participation, of the local community and of the business and the voluntary sectors. This kind of framework, LEADER, assumes that local areas have more control on the development process as they are mobilizing their own resources, local resources, and they set up mechanisms to sustain local development. It also sees endogenous development as a mechanism of effective intervention that involves extra local actors. So actors that do not, although it's based on local resources, it does involve resources that do not come from within, so to say. So there is a dialectic of local development in this kind of framework, which is manifested through the local engaging the extra local, whether that refers to individuals or organizations. There's a territorial identity that is shaped using the characteristics of the population, but also the others, the external, and the extra local agents that are used to mobilize the local identity. So the neo-endogenous development is introduced to describe, as Ray argues, endogenous-based development in which extra local factors are recognized and regarded as essential, but which retains a belief in the potential of local areas to shape their future. The development of local areas in neo-endogenous development theory involves a combination of actors, first from within the area, secondly from above, such as national governments, for example, and thirdly, from an intermediary level, such as, for example, non-governmental associations. The neo-endogenous development theory, an example of which is this case study, can serve as a strategy to raise awareness of local resources for territorial purposes. It is locally rooted. It is marked by interactions between local environments and outside factors. And as Ray again argues, local collectivity and solidarity is a necessary basis for neo-endogenous development to succeed within the wider context of globalization. Networking is important between rural regions. It's also paramount in neo-endogenous development because it is a way to access non-locally available resources and non-locally available infrastructure. We're going to see all how all these apply to the case study. Also, a few things on rural communities and festivals and the importance of festivals for rural communities. It is argued in scholarship by many different scholars. It's not just the sources that I'm mentioning here. This is only examples. How arts can impact economic and social sustainability in rural communities in a range of ways. They can offer a sense of belonging, they can offer a connection to the local population, they can enhance opportunities to both connect and socialize and construct and share individual and collective identities. They're also important for local communities. It is also important to have their own platforms rather than using top-down policies as a means to reinforce the sense of local, local meaning local in terms of both space, local space and local identity. And it is the arts that can provide such a platform. They can contribute to strengthening a sense of place and community. They enhance civic participation. They offer opportunities for interaction and engagement with local activities in local communities and rural areas. And they can also encourage an understanding between different groups of people. Also, the importance of culture here in the sense of it can bring added value to a territory. It can provide platform for generating social and economic value, which in turn contributes to new forms of active citizenship. It also can assist in providing new definitions on well-being and soft innovation processes. Role of artistic practice in rural music community development has been researched with regards to its non-economic effects, and the focus on the effects of art experience in community relationship has revealed that artistic practice plays a paramount role in participatory rural development, and it is a central factor to understand community relationship and microdynamics. Public celebrations and festivals are also particularly important for rural communities, again, because of the collective sense of identity that they help to foster, collective sense of place as well, and their contribution to empowerment, sustainability, and revitalization of areas. Festivals can, as sites of, as communicative spaces and as sites of belonging and participation, offer connections, they offer information, they offer energy exchange, and they have the ability to offer complex relationship and a sense of community. There it argues that communities establishing festivals to highlight feelings of ownership and belonging, first of all for resident participants. There's also forms of culture that are not normally associated with rural areas that can contribute to regional transformation and the accumulation of cultural capital in ways that can trigger interregional linkages and transitions. In rural settings, they can contribute to shifting and reshaping regional identities from ones associated with traditional activities, such as, for example, fishing and harvesting, to more alternative ones that are connected, for example, with tourism, with entertainment, or with gourmet agriculture even. A few things on Greek cultural policy to set the cultural policy framework of the case study. National Greek cultural policy has been largely oriented towards a treatment of culture that is focused on three main categories, which have not changed over time. The first one is cultural heritage and international audiences. The second one is the return of the Parthenon marbles. And the third one is the synergies between culture and tourism. The Greek cultural policy trajectory does not seem to have moved, historically through the years towards the association of culture with access, for example, with diversity, with participation, or the intrinsic benefits of culture, but rather remains focused on the instrumental and primarily economic impacts of culture. Greek cultural policy seems to be disconnected from the periphery and from regional and local development policy, since it places emphasis on the metropolitan centers. It does not promote through policy and relevant actions the interconnections of culture with rural development or regeneration. However, there has been a decentralization noticeable in cultural policy since the 80s, when the transfer of administration and funding responsibilities went to the municipalities. And since then, local authorities have become more active in the cultural life of the areas through creating cultural infrastructure, creating cultural institutions, such as small festivals, for example, and events that were supported financially by the states. That was part of the state budget that was going to the municipalities, which were then allocating it to certain activities and purposes. The two big cities in the country still dominate the cultural life. So Athens and Thessaloniki are still playing a dominant role through the concentration of infrastructure in them, cultural institutions, of course, creative industries, and major events. With reference to the smaller cities, the cultural strategies of medium and small cities tend to focus on social objectives, which are mostly aimed at the local community rather than international visitors, but do offer possibilities for creativity and promotion of image of their areas. Going to the case study now, just showing you a map to see where it is actually situated. You can see the second one, the map of the country, the map of Greece. The case that is situated in Crete, Greece's biggest island, on the western part of Crete. And on the first map on my left, you can see the spots where this cultural initiative is based. Yortes Rokas is the name of this initiative. Their vision, as it appears on their websites, is to restore a sustainable framework to inland communities through the practices of cultural management. This is specifically mentioned. I mean, cultural management is specifically mentioned in their aim. It is a meeting place for the citizens. It takes place in the two villages. One is Roka, the other one is Kera, in the area of Kissamos. It's two neighboring villages of about 16 inhabitants in total, so both of them. The area of Kissamos is not very developed touristically, and it is one of the interesting areas in the region of Crete. It's on the western part of the island. It is interesting for tourists, but it has not been a destination of massive tourism. Lately, there have been a lot of big touristic units, big hotels being built, but before that, it has been underdeveloped in comparison to the other areas of the same region. The role of cultural management in Yortes Rokas is a tool. I mean, it serves as a tool to restore and develop regional community frameworks and also create a sense of belonging and social inclusion in small communities. Yortes Rokas started as an initiative of one individual who basically asked themselves a very simple question. We have a very nice area here. There's not that many people. How can we bring culture here? How can we bring a symphony orchestra here? How can we bring cultural activities in this hill? If you see the stage, this is how it looks like. So the main event of Yortes Rokas takes place there. In August, in the day of the full moon in August every year. And there have been symphony orchestras, there have been classical music artists that have been performing on that stage that you can see. And the audience is just, sitting on the ground. There's no traditional sort of theater, there's no traditional venue, there's no classical music venue as we are used to thinking about it. So the main event takes place there. There's always, the main event always takes place on the day of August full moon, because this was part of how it all started. There's an initiative from the Greek Ministry of Culture that enables archaeological sites and cultural heritage sites and archaeological sites to open on the day of the August full moon for visitors, and have cultural events for free for the audience. There are some cultural heritage sites that open only on that date. but there's also others that are open throughout the year that host cultural events every year in the August Full Moon. In Hiša Podlog, there has been, I think, except the first season, so 2013, when it all started, and this year, 2021, except these two, there has always been classical music concert taking place as a main event. The initiative is providing a networking of local communities and aiming to provide a platform for a re-evaluation of culture and society. I'm going to explain more in a few seconds. It is based on volunteers, both from villages and external, corporate financing and sponsorship, local businesses, and literal crowdfunding. And in terms of, with reference to these two, there's a very special function of the volunteers. The initiative is based on volunteers, obviously, both from the villages and external. The way the volunteers are used, however, in this case, is to support, to provide support for the local community. The local community, so all the people of both villages, are producers of the events. Every single person takes and participates in the organization of the events, in the production of the events, and also as an audience. The artistic programming is suggested by the organizing team, and then it is discussed with all the people from the village, from both villages, until they reach an agreement on what kinds of events are going to be organized in the following season. This is also one of the uniquenesses, one of the unique points of the initiative. That it's a collective effort in a sense. Everyone has a say. Everyone can say their opinion, and artistic programming is based on a collective agreement, so to say, collective effort. So volunteers, in that sense, of course, the local community is volunteering. No one is gaining money from that. No one is getting paid from that. But the role of volunteers, of external volunteers who come to support the initiative, who come during the season to support the initiative, is to provide a safety net and support emotionally the local population, who sometimes, who are not used to, for example, having an orchestra playing, who have not heard of an orchestra playing before, who are called to produce a symphonic concert without prior experience and without prior knowledge of how to do that. The initiative in Hiša Podlog is based on financing and sponsorship. And it's also supported by the regional, of course, it's supported in this initiative from the Ministry of Culture, but also from regional authorities who act as co-organizers, who assist also in the promotion of it. It's also sponsored. It's also assisted by, supported by the local and regional media in disseminating the information and the program for the events and all the activities, and on crowdfunding, which actually is taking place literally. I know we're using a different concept of crowdfunding, but crowdfunding here is as follows. A few months before the event, before the actual season starts, there's a couple of people who are responsible for that, who go door to door to ask for the support of the local inhabitants. I have been told, well, when I was conducting the interviews, of cases of older people who, of course, are not able to support in practical way, are not able to help with moving things, to help carrying out musical instruments or whatever, who actually, give money because this is the way that they feel they can support the initiative. So crowdfunding takes place door to door. The Cretan way, as we say, which means people are invited in, they have a chat with the residents, then sometimes they eat together, they drink together, and this is how it all happens. Although Γιορτές Rokas started as a one-day event, it has expanded through the years, lasting a few days now. And it has incorporated a series of workshops that are related to the local community. So there are different workshops. They're related, for example, to the cultural practices of the previous times. There's also workshops, for example, that are aimed at women. Jewelry making is one example. That are linked with occupations, with practices that used to be carried out in the past in the area, but have now been neglected and don't exist anymore. These workshops are aimed both at children and at adults. So there's different crowd, different audience for each one of them. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, my presentation froze for a bit. Although it's actually a festival, I mean, one can recognize, a festival here. The Γιορτές Rokas is consciously not described as such. No one says that this is a festival. No one uses the word festival. And this is because the word festival was found to be a little bit intimidating for the local people who were not used to this kind of an event. And Γιορτές, the name Γιορτές, which is translated as festivities, was introduced when one of the inhabitants mentioned that the event felt like a feast that they would also have in their homes, which actually describes Γιορτές Rokas very accurately, given that all other activities, everything else that happens except the main event, literally takes place in people's gardens, in the yards, in the village square, in the fields, the open fields of the inhabitants. So it is a feast that they have at home in that sense. One point that we also I've also talked about a bit before is that all inhabitants of both villages act as cultural managers and producers and actively participate in all tasks. Whether that is, deciding on the artistic programming, whether that means, moving chairs for the orchestra members to sit, whether that means it has happened moving a grand piano on the mountain because, the area where the stage is not accessible by car. So there has been a lot of, hands moving, especially musical instruments. One of the achievements of Γιορτές Rokas is that it associated classical music with the area. There has been absolutely no tradition or previous connection or relation of classical music with the area. But what Γιορτές Rokas managed to do is bring ensembles, bring symphony orchestras that have not performed in the urban centers of the area before, to perform there for the first time. And in that way, doing that in the minds of the audience, in the mind of the people of the region, it associated classical music with Roka and Kera, the two villages. The artistic programming, or the particularities again of the initiative, the artistic programming is based on a dialectic relationship between the team and the inhabitants. There is a dialect, there's a dialogue in, you know, deciding it, in raising opinions, in presenting different views, in collective decisions that are being made. Volunteerism is not based on practical help, but more on emotional support and encouragement for something that the local inhabitants are not used to do, are not used to being part of the area, and do not actually know how to do, I mean, in practical ways. The inhabitants participate in the production of events that they would not attend as audience. There are a lot of people who would not attend a classical music concert. They would not go to classical music concert, but now they attend and they actually find it extremely interesting. This gives a sense of co-creation, since everyone is a producer in that sense. In a festival, there is not a festival, as I explained before. Intervention also is taking place in 3 levels: the artistic, the educational, and the level of the local development. There's an outside intervention, there's an inside, there's this combination of local and extra local that one is seeing here, as we have seen, as we have previously seen. A few information, just some information on the audience. I'm not going to go on for too long. To see how it has developed through the years. The first year was 2013. This Rockers started in 2013 with 1,600 people, reaching to 7,000 people in 2017. In 2018, I mean, the data is not there, but it has attracted 8,000 people. And I think the 2019 ones reached something around, something in the area of 10,000 people. This is the information from, this information is from Jurtes Rokas. They have contacted, they have provided me with, kind of provided me with the information of audience until 2017. There's people, you know, there's different age groups that one can see. There's a good representation in all years, people from all ages. There's also children now in the workshops, for example, theater workshops that are taking place. Also people that come from abroad now to attend the events, from the wider area, from the region of Chania, as well as from the Crete and rest of Greece, which gives an example of you know, where the audience comes from, which areas, which regions people do come from to attend. The 2018 numbers are 8,000 visitors, 200 artists, 100 active participants in various actions, 170 supporters, 800 people taking place in the theater performances, of which 200 were children, also in the workshops, 1,500 in the opening ceremony, and 5,000 in the main events, and more than 3,500 followers in the social media, which have been recently developed. A few things to close. What Jurtes Rokas managed to do is create a common language of communication between people with different experiences and people with different know-how. The rationale of Jurtes Rokas is summarized in in a phrase that one of the interviewees told me. Here, there's a future for everyone, young and old. It has helped residents of both villages to become more involved with their place, with their area, with their villages. And it also has given, incentives for young people to return in the summer. It has boosted visitorship to both villages, making the area a pole of attraction for tourism throughout the year, actually. And it has enabled inhabitants to re-establish affection, love, and pride for the region. The Greek rural places, small villages, have been governed by this idea. I mean, the idea of young people having to leave, to study and find a better future has been quite popular. Because of the agricultural life, the rural life has been being very demanding and very hard, and physically hard. Most of the parents encourage their children to leave, go to the city, study, and have a better future. That has led, and throughout the years, historically, in the depopulation of areas, and the concentration of people in the nearby urban centers. And of course, this has in turn led to whole villages being completely empty and being neglected. Jurtas Rokas has enabled inhabitants, therefore, to reestablish affection, love, and pride for the region. And instead of a constant alienation, instead of an encouragement of people for young people to leave, it has managed to make the people develop, the inhabitants, an endearment and attachment to their villages and the area, which has resulted in people coming back rather than leaving. People going back to renovate their houses, use them as summer residencies, welcome people, and give life to the village and the area. I'm closing here with a picture of one of the events that took place in an earlier Jurtas Rokas season, which has been an initiative that presented the history of the villages. You can see one of the villages. I think I'm not sure it's Kolokytha from the picture, but using that, people were able, to wear headphones and listen to the history of the village while they were watching, this nicely made lantern of the village itself. I'm closing here. I hope it was not too long. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and I very much look forward to your questions. Shall I stop my presentation?
Thank you so much, Olga. Yeah, maybe you can keep this beautiful photo. Oh, voila. Okay, we are back.
Shall I keep it? I can keep it.
No, it's okay. We can do it like that now. Perfect. So do we maybe have some questions from the audience? Morda imamo kakšno vprašanje v občinstvu, lahko tudi po slovensko napišete ali pa vprašate, pa bomo potem lepo prevedli naprej. Mogoče bomo pustimo malce časa, pa začnem jaz kar z enim vprašanjem. Maybe I just start with a very interesting question. Thank you so much, Olga, for a very interesting presentation and a lot of interesting food for thought, given that what we are also trying to do and achieve at Hiša Podlog. And actually, my kind of a little bit of interesting question will be, you mentioned particularly kind of this notion of moving away from the festival, labeling something as a festival. Wouldn't that be in somehow contradicting or interesting relationship, given the fact, there is such a high interest also of policy making on rural, on local, on national levels, that broader cultural field is being professionalized. And then, as you say, this is clearly moving away from really saying, no, this is a professional organization for professional project. And it's really giving it back to the people. Is the future of, let's say, rural culture really moving more towards having professional organization that facilitates, that really facilitates the process for the community, with community? Or is it, on the other hand, another extreme, really translating the typical urban model of professional institution that has the assignment of a role to do this task in the community?
I think, this is a very interesting question. So thank you very much for that, because I think, it's not easy to answer. My view is that it depends. Both models can work. I think depending on the framework, on the area, on the region or the institution, and so on. In this case, for example, what we see is that naming this a festival will probably won't work in that specific framework. And having it run by, for example, by a team of experts without the consultation of the local people would be impossible. But this is also depending. This is the case, but this depends also, on the traditions, on the area itself. If people are familiar with culture, what kind of culture, how are the customs, the traditions, and everything. So I think it's not possible to have. It's not easy to say that this is a model, that there's only one model that would work. Of course, in urban centers, it's very common to find professional organizations, doing professional management in cultural events and so on. I think it definitely depends, and I think the interesting thing is to find, what would be the what would be the most effective combination. This is a very interesting example because you have a team that can propose an artistic program that has been not trained, has the experience and the cultural experience. The artistic experience, the artistic training, so to say, to propose the programming. But then this is discussed and agreed upon by the local community. I find this extremely interesting because it's interesting, for example, to propose, I don't know, a symphony orchestra with a Bruckner program, and having a discussion on the Bruckner program. I think this is also this is a clear example for me of if we want to go into areas of cultural democracy, for example. This is a very interesting example of cultural democracy. This is a democratic decision on programming, but it's been taken by people who are not trained experts, in a sense. I find this extremely interesting, but I think there's no way to say that this is the right model or this is the right model. I think it all depends, and it is extremely interesting and I think it's extremely useful, trying to find which is the model that would work every time, and not being afraid to test. Don't be afraid to experiment, in a sense.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your answer. It's really, really, really interesting. Imamo morda opogumljenega udeleženca, ki bi si želel vprašati kakšno vprašanje za našo gostjo? No, I think not. So I would just like to really wrap it up, Olga, and say a very, really big thank you for your time, for your very insightful presentation, and for actually a lot of inspiration, as I said before, towards what we are actually doing and trying to do in Hiša Podlog, and a lot of food for thought. Actually, that's what I would say. It leaves me going into the evening with a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts of what we should be maybe even changing already for next year. So that's actually, I think, a really good good starting point for us. So thank you so much, Olga. Now I'll just shift to Slovenian and make a nice conclusion, and then we'll say thank you for tonight. Še enkrat najlepša hvala v imenu Hiše Podlog vsem, ki ste se nam pridružili v preteklih 4 tednih, vsak torek, v našem ciklu predavanj od kulturne dediščine do trajnostnega razvoja. V imenu kulturne rezidence Podlog pod Bohorjem bi se rad še enkrat zahvalil predvsem našim podpornikom projekta, to je bila Mestna občina Šentjur, ki nam je tudi delno finančno pomagala pri realizaciji samega projekta, in seveda vsem vam, ki ste se udeležili, postavili vprašanje oziroma sploh nam namenili čas in željo, da tudi vi morda dobite kakšno novo informacijo. Tako, brez dolgorečenja in dolgovezanja vam zaželim v našem imenu še zelo prijetno praznično obdobje oziroma predbožični čas, vesele praznike, in upam, da se v prihodnjem letu vidimo tudi na kakšnem izmed prihodnjih dogodkov kulturne rezidence Podlog pod Bohorjem, tako virtualno kot tudi online. Tako da res iskrena hvala za nocoj in želim vam še en prijeten večer.